Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening for those of us in Europe today, and welcome to Pascal's Wager, the Candidates 2020 edition. We had an exciting day of chess. We find ourselves a little bit lucky in these days to have chess to watch when there's really not much else to do. In the United States, they canceled all professional sports pretty much all over the world. I have been in self-isolation. I've barely been outside for a few days. I have two little kids at home. This is a tough period for everyone, but we are trying to make the best of it at Chess 24. We had an amazing day of chess. Some pretty surprising results, I would say, today. We're going to go through that. In this after show, my goal is going to be to provide you with daily highlights of the stories that happened in chess on that day. Obviously for the candidates and in this time period, really all that it's going to be about are those games, but today that provided more than enough excitement. I did want to start by showing a scene that kind of exhibits a little bit what was going on site. Let me push that scene through. Give me 1 second. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a technical issue here getting my getting this thing to show. I apologize for this, but what I'm trying to show is the I'm actually just gonna redo it. Here we go. I apologize for the little delay here. All right, here we go. So this is the scene where you can see, I'm going to play it here. You can see the former world champion Anatoly Karpov shake Anish Giri's hands, and then Nepomniachtchi on the other side just kind of looks at him, and this is quite funny. I mean, I think there's a little bit of irony in the fact that it was the Dutchman Anish Giri who has been tweeting a whole lot about the virus, who actually ultimately shook Karpov's hand, although he quickly, as you can see, reaches with his left hand for the bottle of Purell that they have available on their desk. But Nepomniachtchi, who is the Russian, he refuses to shake the hand of the of course, Russian golden boy who was the world champion and a big friend of the Kremlin for very many years, Anatoly Karpov. So I thought there was a little bit of irony in this, and definitely worth showing at the beginning of this game that turns out to be a very important game. All right, so let me go back to my live chess viewer here. I'll actually remove this one. It was a day where black was okay. There's a famous chess book that you guys may know called Black is Okay by a man named Dorian. And in fact, in our fantasy chess contest today, one of the questions that a lot of people didn't pick right is that at some point in this tournament, there's 14 rounds to this tournament, would black ever win 2 games? And the thought was that, and I'm just going to show the fantasy contest here. The thought was, for many people, that this would simply not happen, including me, by the way. My picks were not that amazing. And I just filmed, by the way, a little video about today's fantasy chess contest, but I didn't get this question right. And today we had 2 black wins, one by Jan Nepomniachtchi here, and I'm going to show you the results of today here. Today we had also probably the most shocking result of the day is that Hao Wang with the black pieces beat his compatriot Ding Liren with the black pieces, and it was sort of a game. It was not the kind of game that you would expect Ding to lose almost ever from the opening that he got, but he made one key mistake, and we're going to go through that. But so if we look at the standings now, and the other 2 games were draws, so MVL drew against Fabiano, and Grishchuk drew against Kirill Alexenko. The pairings, a little bit, not funny, but it just so happened that in this first round we had an all-Russian matchup and also an all-Chinese matchup. The Russian matchup ended up peacefully, though not without fireworks. It was a pretty exciting game. The game between MVL and Fabiano was probably the most sort of, it was a very well-played game, but it was more quiet. It didn't feel like either player really had a great chance of winning in that game. And then obviously the other 2 games were won by black, but but in quite different fashion. So let's get through a couple things here. And the way I'm structuring this show is I'm trying to have sections so that people can relate to what's going on. And the first one is going to be the novelty of the day, and that's going to actually allow us to get through what really was probably the most interesting game today, and that's the game between Anish Giri and Jan Nepomniachtchi. So let's go through the opening, because there is a novelty at some point. A novelty for those who are not as famous with chess terminology. The novelty is when someone plays a move that has never been played before. So Anish here plays knight f3. They get into a symmetrical English. Magnus Carlsen, who was doing commentary for us today and was extremely insightful as always, was saying that maybe Anish should have gone for the Grunfeld, because Jan normally plays a Grunfeld with black, and that maybe that's an opening where it's more possible to play for an edge than in this variation. But in any case, they get in this position, which after queen b6 is a very sharp line, but it's actually a line that's been played a ton. And sometimes these sharp variations, they're super sharp, but they're analyzed so deeply that both sides can actually feel quite comfortable with the complications, because the resulting position, 15 moves down the road, might not be as complicated as the one that's on the board right now, that's been analyzed very deeply with the best computer programs. So knight b5, knight e5, these are all kind of strange moves and a little bit hard to understand. I'm not going to go through like the explanation of the whole opening, because it would just take a really long time. But basically, all of this has been played like, I think, hundreds of games. Knight fg4 is a move that, of course, threatens queen takes f2 and also defends the knight on e5. White plays e3, a6, h3. So there's sort of an odd trade of minor pieces here. And now in this position, after knight takes e4, we're on move where black just played their 11th move here, and Anish here uncorks a pretty surprising novelty, rook to c1. So he played this instantly, right? So he still, they start with 100 minutes, an hour 40 on their clock. He still has an hour 40 on his clock, and he plays this move, rook to c1. Clearly, Nepomniachtchi was surprised. He took quite a while to respond here. It's possible that he had actually looked at it and was trying to remember. I don't know. It's hard to assess, and I'm not sure what he said in the press conference about this specific question. But he did spend like a good 30 minutes, I think, here, and he plays the move that's probably the most solid and seems to be best. He plays d5. And this is complex. We're going to go through some variations here. But Anish plays b3, which was sort of the idea behind rook c1, was to kick that knight away. But now the position gets incredibly complicated. And what makes me think that Ian might have looked at this before is that here he does play the move that is the computer best move, and also seems like a fairly difficult move to find over the board, or at least to go for when you know your opponent is so well prepared. So he plays bishop to b4. Now, white doesn't have too much of a choice here. Actually, there was an interesting sort of variation starting with g5, and I wonder if Anish clearly was still very well prepared, because he played everything instantly. But that was sort of an odd move, and there's the computer gives, again, these are difficult variations for a human to really understand. But the computer gives e5, so threatening the bishop. And now bishop takes c4. So instead of going for pawn takes c4, which, as we see, wins a piece on the face of it, but then the pinned knight means that piece gain is only temporary. And now pawn takes c4, bishop takes e5, and we just have a very messy position. But it looks like on the face of it, black seems to be okay. So that was the move g5, which the computer at some point considered best. But the thing is, I think the computer underestimates Anish's position, because what Anish does is he simply takes on c4. Now black plays rook a3. They've got to quickly try to get the piece back, otherwise they won't have enough compensation. Bishop e5 to defend the piece, f6 to defend the pawn on g7 and attack the bishop. Bishop goes back to d4, queen a5. So all of this is kind of forced, and now it looks like black is in really, really good shape because they're winning their piece back, and it seems like the white king is still 2 moves from castling, and so it looks like black may just be up material after they win their piece back. But now Anish instantly plays bishop e2, and at that point, I was listening to the commentary with Jan and Magnus Carlsen and Lawrence Trent, and they both were. Everyone was kind of shocked, but also obviously understood that this was all preparation. So Anish plays rook takes c3 instantly, rook takes c3, and just king f1. And so very quickly, Anish has given up an exchange. Of course, by the way, taking the rook back, queen takes c3, king f1, pawn takes c4 is just a disaster for white. Right? They're down 2 pawns. And 2 pawns, and the king is not in any trouble for black, so this probably is just winning. So that's out of the question. But to go for this position, of course, you need to have looked at it before. He instantly plays king f1 and basically says that he's going to get an attack against the black king, and that the exchange plus pawn really don't matter that much. He wants to play g4 to g5. He has pressure on the h7 pawn, potentially with the queen coming to b1 and this diagonal. So if black castles, that could be trouble. There's also ideas with bishop h5 check. So really an interesting position. And in fact, the computer, after looking at this for a while, thinks that white is just fine here, not worse, not really better. But Ian finds a really good practical move. I mean, there were certainly lots of options here. Like, for example, one could try to simply move the rook out of the way, so play rook a3. But the position here after g5 is really pretty dangerous. I think something like this, is maybe playable, but it looks extremely dangerous. Like, I think, for example, on g takes f6, if you play g takes f6, already that position is possibly just trouble for black. I think there's definitely a lot of counterplay anyway. So Ian plays the move b4, sort of a really interesting move. He's just saying, all right, I'm going to keep my rook on c3, and if you take it, then I'll have a very strong fast pawn. So basically, both players are happier keeping this bishop than taking that rook. So g5, e5, trying to keep that diagonal closed. And actually, it seems like Anish was playing very well. This happened, and he played queen b1, attacking the pawn on h7 with the rook and the queen. And it looked like he was playing well until just actually queen d3 on move 24 here was maybe not the best, although a very natural move. He's trying to take the pawn on d5 with the queen. He can't really play, well, you could try c takes d5, but then after c2 the pawn is just too strong. You don't want to be stuck with the queen on c1. He would rather actually give this pawn, right, like have black take with d takes c4, because then that pawn is not moving as easily, the other c pawn. So anyway, queen d3 was an interesting move, but b5 was a really strong response. Now, again, Anish plays some moves that seem to be okay, and we reach a position that really looks like it should be a draw, which would have been kind of an amazing result. But after castles here, Anish just blundered. It seems like if he played something like rook h4, he's down a pawn, but I think that white's position is probably enough to make a draw, because the black king is a little bit less safe than the white king, and it's hard to see how black will really make progress. Of course, I would rather be black, but it's not really that bad. But bishop takes c4 was really bad. After king g7, he just has a nasty pin against the queen, and it's not easy for white to untangle himself. So he plays queen b3, which is sort of the you have to get out of the pin while defending the bishop, and on any of these moves, the rook comes and attacks the queen, and there's not really a good solution. So now if queen a4, rook b1 check, king g2, bishop d7, and it's just a difficult position. Now the white king is actually the less safe of the two. This is not over, but it's pretty tough. So Anish decided to, after rook b8, sacrifice the queen for a rook and 2 pieces. And ultimately, it actually got to a very interesting endgame. And I'm not going to go through everything because it's going to take too long. But this endgame that they reached here with queen against rook was very, very close to being a fortress draw. And some people with table bases looked at it and said that, some positions with the a pawn actually are a draw. And without it, most of them are lost unless the white king can get to the e1 square, and then if he keeps his rook on like e3 and g3, there's no way for black to get through. But he's never quite able to get his king there, and I think Ian played really well, and this is a really impressive game from Nepomniachtchi because clearly he was surprised in the opening by something that Anish had prepared extremely well, but he managed to somehow just keep things together and actually even win this game with black in the first round of the tournament. So I'm just going to show the final position because it's a little bit relevant to our fantasy chess contest. Black played queen d3, and one of our daily questions here said that in any one game, if the queen, if one side takes the other side's queen and the other queen is not recaptured, then you get X point. I forget how many points, but it was quite a few points. And it's just funny because in this very final position, white actually has the opportunity to take the black queen, which would have completely changed our contest for today. But of course he just resigned because after rook takes d3, pawn takes d3, the pawn queens. And by the way, and if he goes like rook g3 instead and tries to kind of keep a fortress, here like he's just not holding anymore because the rook can't come to e3 because black will take it, and again that could change our fantasy contest if he took it back, but obviously there's no fortress, so this is just lost. Next we're going to go through the other game here between Ding Liren and Wang Hao, and I actually have a category for this one too, which I call blunder of the day, because in this game, really, Ding Liren had played very solidly, and he's someone, he basically never loses, right? He's someone that loses so few games. He's very solid. I think the main concern, he was a popular pick, by the way, to win the tournament in our fantasy contest. I think he was the #1 pick out of anyone, even ahead of Fabiano. So this is the kind of opening that he plays very well, and this plan with e4, actually Magnus was discussing a little bit in our stream. It's a good sort of typical space grabbing plan, and it tends to lead to slightly better positions for white. And so it seems like he's just slightly better. This plan with knight a6 kind of forces a change in the structure, but it doesn't change the evaluation of the position, which is that white seems to be a little bit better. But for some reason, I'll get to the point where there's a blunder here. They reached this endgame again. I think a little bit better for white. Black can probably hold because white has so few sort of pawn levers. But the main one, of course, is f2 to f4, and he spends several moves preparing it. But the ironic thing is that when he plays it here on move 30, it's actually a blunder, and really kind of changes the evaluation of the position from a little bit better for white to just much worse for white. It seems like the right plan. I don't know. I mean, you could play maybe knight to e3, recycle the knight perhaps to d5 first. It's maybe also another plan would be to play king f3 and king e2 just to start by defending the d3 pawn before undertaking anything else. Still seems like a position that black can probably hold, but certainly white should almost never lose. But after f4 is an understandable blunder because the resulting position is going to be this knight against this bishop, and that seems to be happening by force, and that seems to be, who wouldn't want that, right? The problem is that in the tactical nature of the position, so this on the face of it looks like a great trade, right? White has this incredible knight, black has a bad bishop, but unfortunately Wang Hao has this move f5, and this move actually completely changes the character of the position. And from having a position where it looks like you have an incredible knight, Now he's forced to play e5 and has pawn weaknesses that are hard to defend. So this pawn, and this pawn all have problems. So even though this bishop looks like a dud versus this very strong knight, it turns out that this position is actually pretty tough. So he goes rook to e6. So he's trying to bring the rook to g6 and g4. King f3. Now there is a moment where I think Wang Hao actually maybe he played a little bit too quickly. This position now is actually difficult, right? Like the bishop is actually coming to d8 to attack this pawn. This rook on a3 is kind of stuck to defending the d3 pawn, and at various points black has this idea to play rook g4 and potentially even sacrifice the exchange just to create passed pawns. And suddenly, white doesn't have much to do other than just try to defend all their pawns. But here, I think Wang Hao was a little bit imprecise. So after knight c2, rook d5, knight e3, rook d7. So in this position, he actually talked about this in the stream, I believe, in the interview afterwards. I'm sorry. There was actually the move d4, and suddenly black actually has to trade, and it's not so clear, right? So after knight c2, king d5, the problem is that there's this knight takes d4 followed by the skewer, and it looks like white may just escape. So d4 was possible, and there was another variation actually that Wang Hao mentioned. I think it was starting with this rook a to d2, bishop h4, d4. Was it like this? I think it was. Pawn takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook g3, king e2, bishop e7, rook c4. I think he was talking about this variation, and suddenly it was quite difficult because on bishop c5 there's rook takes c5. A very pretty variation where pawn takes b6. Now if the king goes to d7, e6 is just winning for white. You have two pawns, 3 squares apart. That's sort of an old motif. But black does have the move rook g1, hoping to come back to b1. And Wang Hao was giving this variation in the press conference. Although when I looked at it with the computer later, I'm not sure that everything was entirely forced. But it's definitely a pretty variation. Then you just go back, rook g1, knight d1, and it's a forced draw. But yeah, so it seems like maybe Wang Hao actually kind of let him out in a few ways. But here on move 40, Ding Liren a little bit short on time, just kind of blundered. And after bishop takes h4 here, now it's just finished. And after rook g2, rook g4, so now he can go for the exchange sacrifice. If knight takes, pawn takes, these passed pawns are just extremely strong. It's clearly a lost position. They'll just the king goes to f5 and then bishop back and then h4, h3. So this game ended like this. White just resigned. I mean, simply because they have no plan against, again, king f5 and either g3 followed by king g4, or maybe h3 followed by, bishop h4, bishop g3. There's really, you're up in exchange, but there's no compensation against the free connected passers. So this was really kind of a shocking result in round one, and I can show you the standings here. So I've got the standings. Give me 1 second. So in the standings, we have two leaders here, Wang Hao and Ian Nepomniachtchi with 1 point. Obviously, the standings are fairly simple after just one game. But I guess that not a lot of people expected Ding Liren to lose his first game with white. Again, he loses so few games. He's very high rated and he's very consistent. Also, Wang Hao, had been a little bit lukewarm about playing at the last minute. He did say on his Facebook account, I would show you, but I don't know if I'm allowed to show someone's, Facebook posts. I don't know if those are considered private, but anyway, he had posted that, he felt FIDE should probably have canceled this event. I was a little bit surprised, to see the press conferences, which, you can catch. We are showing the official stream on our, coming from the candidates tournament. In our broadcast, so you could catch these interviews as well. But I was surprised, the players are standing pretty close to each other, and in I know in the U.S. we're not doing this anymore, and I think in probably most of the places where people are tuning in to hear this, we're just not having press conferences with players in close proximity to the media and really to each other. And again, we saw the Karpov handshake, handshake followed by refused handshake. But yeah, so this was a really exciting sort of first round for the tournament, and two shocking results. We had people betting on whether Anish Giri would make 14 draws. Well, he just started with a loss. I think he's going to be motivated. I don't think he should be discouraged. I actually think there's still a reasonable chance he just comes back and has a positive score. He was well prepared in this game. He just kind of hit a wall. Ian Nepomniachtchi played really well against his idea, which who knows, maybe it was a little bit of a dubious idea. Some of these opening ideas, you try to do something to pose problems to your opponent, and if it doesn't work out, or if he plays perfectly, you might be even okay with accepting that you don't have anything more than maybe equality. I'm sure he didn't think that he was going to be worse, but things obviously went downhill. We should see some more interesting chess in the next couple of days. Hopefully this tournament can keep going. I know Grishchuk had said maybe 50-50 to finish it. Well, we're certainly rooting for it to finish, and we hope to continue to entertain you. I highly recommend. I'm going to put my fantasy chess link up here so that you can. Do I still have it? Well, actually, yeah. I'll just tell you. Go to chess24.com/fantasy. Fill out your second round bracket so that you can continue to participate and win prizes. And I will be back on some of these after shows. I will have guests. Obviously, because of the current situation, my guests will probably be virtual, but I will have some interesting people. And yeah, I can't wait for tomorrow. Thanks for joining me, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.